Section 1 Introduction. The timeless allure of ancient Egypt. Across thousands of years, the land of ancient Egypt has held the imagination of people from every part of the world. Even today, the word Egypt calls to mind visions of golden sand, massive stone pyramids, silent statues, and secret tombs filled with stories and treasures. But what is it about this ancient civilization that makes it so captivating? Why does its memory remain so alive long after the kingdom itself has faded into the desert? The story of ancient Egypt unfolds along the gentle curves of the Nile River, a life-giving thread running through the northeast corner of Africa. Here, for more than 3,000 years, a people built a civilization unlike any other. Their lives were shaped by the rhythms of the river. Their homes rose from its banks, and their cities flourished, where its waters allowed green fields to spread in the heart of the desert. Egypt's civilization began before written records around 3100 BCE and endured through countless generations. For centuries, its pharaohs ruled as living gods. They oversaw mighty building projects, commanded armies, and watched as priests performed sacred rituals in towering temples. Their people farmed the land, traded across borders, made art and music, and passed down stories about the world beyond death. No empire lasts forever. Egypt, too, would face times of darkness, famine, war, and division. Its golden days were challenged by invaders and weakened by rulers who lost touch with the heart of the land. But even as it struggled, Egypt never vanished completely. Its spirit, captured in stone and in story, has survived to this day. To truly understand ancient Egypt is to look beyond the famous images of pyramids and pharaohs. It means seeing the world as they did, watching the sun rise over the Nile, listening to the voices of farmers and scribes, standing in awe before the silent gaze of the Sphinx. It means tracing the full journey from the dawn of small villages through the heights of empire to the quiet moments when power slipped away. This is the story of ancient Egypt. It is a story of beginnings and endings, of creativity and courage, of the rise and fall of a civilization that still whispers to us across time. In the chapters that follow, we will walk the banks of the Nile, witness the dreams and struggles of a remarkable people, and see how Egypt earned its place as one of the world's great wonders. Section 2. The gift of the Nile: geography and natural wealth. To understand ancient Egypt, you must first understand the Nile. This river is the longest in the world, stretching over 400 miles from its sources in East Africa to its wide delta on the Mediterranean Sea. Yet for the people of Egypt, the most important part was a narrow strip about 600 miles long, winding through harsh desert, creating a thin ribbon of green in a world of sand. Each year, something miraculous happened. In late summer, heavy rains far to the south would swell the Nile. Its waters rose and overflowed the riverbanks, flooding fields on both sides. When the water finally retreated, it left behind a layer of rich, dark silt, perfect soil for growing wheat, barley, vegetables, and fruit. Without the Nile's yearly flood, Egypt would be nothing but empty desert. Because the river's rhythm was so predictable, Egypt became one of the first places on Earth where people could grow more food than they needed. As early as 5000 BCE, small villages lined the riverbanks. People learned to dig canals and build dikes to guide the water. They planted crops in neat rows, harvested the grain, and stored it in clay jars for the dry months ahead. But the Nile offered more than food. It was a highway. People traveled by boat from one end of Egypt to the other. Trade flourished along the river, connecting towns and villages that might have otherwise been isolated by miles of barren desert. Fishermen pulled tilapia and catfish from its waters. Papyrus reeds grew thick along the banks, ready to be turned into mats, baskets, sandals, and most importantly, the world's first sheets of paper. The Nile did more than feed the people and carry their goods. It shaped their way of life. It set the boundaries of their world. Outside the fertile valley, the land was harsh and empty. The desert was a natural barrier. It protected Egypt from invaders and kept its culture safe from outside change. It also held dangers, sandstorms, wild animals, and sometimes wandering bands of raiders. But most of the time, the desert was a silent guardian. For the Egyptians, the river was sacred. They believed it was a gift from the gods. Every part of their religion and daily life reflected gratitude and respect for the river. The cycle of flood and planting, harvest and drought became the heartbeat of their calendar. Their most important gods, like Osiris and Hapi, were closely tied to the river and its bounty. The predictability of the Nile allowed something rare in the ancient world: stability. While other civilizations struggled with droughts and failed crops, Egypt thrived. Food surpluses meant that not everyone had to be a farmer. Some people could specialize as builders, potters, soldiers, priests, and artists. Surplus grain could be traded for gold, copper, timber, and exotic goods from Africa, the Levant, and beyond. The geography of the land shaped the people who lived there. Upper Egypt to the south was a narrow valley where the Nile cut through rocky hills. Lower Egypt to the north opened out into the broad delta, where the river split into many branches before meeting the sea. Each region developed its own traditions, dialects, and leaders. Yet both were bound together by the river, a single thread running through every part of Egyptian life. It is no exaggeration to say that without the Nile there would be no Egypt. The river's gifts made possible every achievement, every monument, every story that would come later. The ancient Egyptians themselves never forgot this. In their oldest writings, in their greatest temples, and in their quiet prayers, the Nile remained at the center. It was not only the source of their wealth, but the foundation of their dreams. Section 3: Dawn of Civilization, Early Kingdoms and Unification. 4000 to 3100 BCE. Before the pyramids, before the pharaohs carved their names in stone, Egypt was a land of small villages and scattered tribes. For thousands of years, families gathered near the Nile, planting fields, catching fish, and building homes of mud brick. Over time, these clusters of people grew into larger communities, and by around 4000 BCE, the first organized towns began to appear along the river's banks. In the beginning, Egypt was not one kingdom. It was divided into two main regions: Upper Egypt in the south, where the Nile sliced through narrow valleys, and Lower Egypt in the north, where the river spread out into a wide, marshy delta. Each region had its own customs, its own rulers, and its own symbols. Upper Egypt's symbol was the white crown, and its people worshipped vulture and cobra goddesses. Lower Egypt was known for the red crown and the bee, which became its royal emblem. Trade between the two regions was constant. Goods flowed up and down the river: grain, gold, copper, and pottery. Along with trade came competition and sometimes conflict. Each king wanted to control more land, more water, and more wealth. They built fortresses, raised armies, and sent messengers from one village to the next. Over time, the strongest leaders began to gather more power, uniting smaller towns under their rule. By around 3300 BCE, these early rulers had created what historians call the proto-dynastic kingdoms. They left behind painted pottery, carved ivory combs, and clay seals marked with mysterious signs, the first steps toward writing. In the tombs of powerful chiefs, archaeologists have found carved scepters, stone palettes, and treasures buried beside the dead. Even then, the idea of the king as a divine figure chosen by the gods was taking root. The most important moment in early Egyptian history came around 3100 BCE. According to ancient tradition, it was a warrior king named Narmer, sometimes called Menes, who united Upper and Lower Egypt. On a famous carved stone, the Narmer palette, he is shown wearing both the white and the red crowns, symbolizing his rule over both lands. With this act, he began the first dynasty and became the first true pharaoh. The unification was not just about one king defeating another. It was about building a new idea of what Egypt could be. Narmer created a single government with its capital at Memphis, just south of the Nile Delta. He ordered the construction of massive walls, temples, and administrative buildings. He set up a system of officials and tax collectors to manage the land, the water, and the people. For the first time, laws and religious rituals stretched from one end of Egypt to the other. This new unity brought stability. Trade expanded, as did the exchange of ideas. Craftsmen and builders moved freely from town to town. Religious festivals drew crowds from every part of the land. Over time, the belief grew that the king was not only a political leader, but a living god on earth, a being who could speak with the gods, control the floods, and keep order in the world. The concept of kingship became central to Egyptian life. The pharaoh stood at the top, surrounded by priests, scribes, and advisors. Below them were artisans, farmers, and laborers. Each person had a role to play. The unity of Egypt allowed its people to pool their skills, plan great projects, and dream bigger dreams than ever before. Writing developed quickly after unification. The first hieroglyphs appeared simple pictures that told stories, recorded trade, and honored the dead. Priests and scribes learned to keep records on papyrus scrolls, setting the stage for one of the world's first literate societies. As the centuries passed, the idea of Egypt as one land, one people, one king became stronger. Out of many tribes and towns, a single nation had been born. This nation would soon become a beacon of power and culture known across the ancient world. The story of ancient Egypt truly begins here, with the unification of the two lands and the birth of the pharaohs. In the centuries that followed, their ambition and vision would shape the destiny of an entire civilization. Section 4, The Old Kingdom, Age of the Pyramids, 2686–2181 BCE. The Old Kingdom is remembered as the first great age of ancient Egypt. It began around 2686 BCE and lasted for about 5 centuries. During this era, Egypt saw the rise of strong, ambitious rulers who believed they were chosen by the gods. The land became a place of peace, power, and tremendous creativity. It was in these centuries that the Egyptians built some of their most famous wonders, the pyramids. The first pharaohs of the Old Kingdom set out to make Egypt stable and strong. The capital city, Memphis, was filled with busy officials and careful record-keepers. Pharaohs appointed governors called nomarchs to manage each region of the land. These local leaders collected taxes, organized labor, and made sure that crops and goods reached the central government. With a clear system of control, Egypt grew rich and united. Pharaoh Djoser was one of the most important early kings of the Old Kingdom. He ruled around 2667 BCE. Under his command, the architect Imhotep designed the step pyramid at Saqqara just outside Memphis. This stone monument, rising in giant layers toward the sky, was the first of its kind. It marked a bold step away from the old mud-brick tombs. For the Egyptians, the step pyramid was not just a place to bury their king, it was a stairway to the heavens. Soon, other pharaohs wanted to leave their mark. King Sneferu, who ruled a generation after Djoser, experimented with pyramid building. He built 3 great pyramids during his reign, each time improving the design. Finally, Sneferu's architects built the first true pyramid, with smooth sides and a sharp point reaching toward the sun. It was Sneferu's son Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, who built the most famous pyramid of all. The Great Pyramid at Giza was finished around 2560 BCE. For more than 3,800 years, it stood as the tallest man-made structure on Earth. More than 2 million stone blocks were cut, moved, and set in place. Some weighed as much as 70 tons. The building of the pyramid took thousands of workers and decades of planning. Even today, no one knows exactly how it was done. The pyramids were much more than royal tombs. They were symbols of the pharaoh's power and Egypt's unity. Each one was part of a larger complex with temples, statues, causeways, and smaller tombs for family and courtiers. Around them, workers built villages, quarries, and workshops. The whole country took part in the construction, farmers in the flood season, skilled stonemasons, artists, and priests. But the Old Kingdom's achievements did not end with the pyramids. Pharaohs like Khafra and Menkaura built temples to honor the gods. They created statues that showed the pharaohs' faces calm and eternal. Relief carvings decorated the walls, telling stories of battles, feasts, and daily life. Scribes recorded everything, filling the first great archives of Egyptian history. Egypt's wealth came from its well-organized economy. The government controlled farming, collecting grain as taxes. Surplus grain fed the workers, supported the temples, and allowed Egypt to trade with its neighbors. Copper came from Sinai, gold from Nubia. Fine cedar wood from Lebanon brought up the Nile on sturdy ships. Artisans turned these materials into jewelry, weapons, and treasures. Religion shaped every part of Old Kingdom life. The pharaoh was seen as a living god, the bridge between the world of people and the world of the divine. Temples rose beside the pyramids, filled with offerings and prayers. The afterlife became the dream of every Egyptian, a place where the soul could live forever, guided by the magic and protection of the gods. The Old Kingdom's power was built on order and faith. Pharaohs ruled with absolute authority, but their success depended on careful planning and hard work from their people. When the Nile flooded as expected, when the people cooperated, the kingdom prospered. When nature or leadership failed, the system began to crack. For centuries, Egypt shone as a beacon of stability and achievement. The pyramids standing against the desert sky were not just monuments to kings, they were signs of what people could achieve together, with a shared vision and a sense of purpose. Section 5. Society. Religion and everyday life in the Old Kingdom. In the time of the Old Kingdom, life along the Nile moved to the steady rhythm of the river and the sun. The daily world of Egypt was one of both order and mystery. Society was like a pyramid itself, rising from the farmers in the fields to the pharaoh on his throne, with every layer depending on those above and below. At the very top stood the pharaoh. He was not just a king, he was seen as a living god, a child of the sun god Ra, and the link between earth and heaven. The pharaoh's word was law. His image was everywhere, carved in stone, painted on walls, and spoken of in prayer. People believed that as long as the pharaoh ruled with wisdom and justice, the land would stay in balance and the Nile would flood at the right time. Below the pharaoh were the nobles, high officials, and priests. The priests were the keepers of Egypt's many gods. Every city had its favorite deity, but the sun god Ra, the creator god Ptah, and the mother goddess Isis were loved throughout the land. Priests carried out daily rituals in the temples, offering bread, beer, incense, and flowers. They told stories of gods who lived, died, and rose again, stories that comforted people and made sense of life and death. The scribes were a special class. They could read and write the sacred hieroglyphs. Scribes worked for the pharaoh, for temples, and for the wealthy. They kept records, counted grain, measured fields, and wrote letters. Becoming a scribe was a dream for many families. It meant respect, security, and a life away from hard labor. Artisans and craftsmen filled Egypt's cities and villages with color and life. Stone carvers, goldsmiths, painters, and potters created statues, jewelry, and beautiful objects for temples and tombs. Their work was not just for beauty. Every piece had a purpose, serving the gods, honoring the dead, or marking important moments in the pharaoh's reign. Most Egyptians were farmers. They lived in simple mud brick houses, often with 1 or 2 rooms, and worked the land along the Nile. Each year after the flood, families planted wheat, barley, onions, lettuce, and flax for linen. They raised cattle, goats, ducks, and geese. Work was hard, but the regular rhythm of flood planting and harvest gave people a sense of security and hope. Life in the villages followed the rising and setting of the sun. Women baked bread, brewed beer, and cared for children. Men plowed, sowed, and fished. Boys and girls played in the dust, helped with chores, and sometimes attended school to learn reading and math. Festivals were important times marked by music, dancing, feasting, and games. The most joyful moments came during religious celebrations, when people crowded into temple courtyards and shared in the blessings of the gods. Religion shaped every part of daily life. People believed that invisible forces watched over them, good and bad spirits, the favor of the gods, the danger of the unknown. They wore amulets to ward off illness, told prayers for a good harvest, and trusted the wisdom of the priests. In every home, small shrines held images of gods or ancestors. The idea of the afterlife was at the heart of Egyptian belief. Egyptians thought life continued after death in a world much like their own. They prepared carefully for the journey. The rich were buried in grand tombs surrounded by food, clothing, and treasures. The poor were buried with simple pots, bread, and a few personal items. Everyone hoped to be judged kindly by Osiris, the god of the dead, and to live forever in the field of reeds, a paradise where the Nile flowed calmly and crops never failed. The Old Kingdom was also a place of law and order. The pharaoh's officials settled disputes, punished thieves, and kept records of land and property. There was a sense of justice called ma'at, which meant truth, balance, and right conduct. People prayed to Ma'at for fairness and peace. Despite the beauty and order, life could be hard. Droughts, disease, and accidents took their toll. Most people lived short lives by modern standards. Yet even the poorest Egyptian felt a sense of connection to the land, the river, and the great story of Egypt. In every home, on every farm, in every workshop and temple, Egyptians found meaning in their daily routines. Their society was strong because people believed they had a role to play, serving the gods, supporting their family, and keeping the balance of the world. This sense of belonging, order, and hope helped make the Old Kingdom one of the most remarkable societies the world has ever known. Section 6, Collapse and Chaos, the First Intermediate Period, c. 2181–2055 BCE. Even the mightiest empires can stumble. For the people of Egypt, the end of the Old Kingdom brought confusion, fear, and sorrow. After 5 centuries of steady rule, Egypt entered a time of darkness, a period known as the First Intermediate Period, beginning around 2181 BCE. It would last for nearly 130 years. The causes of Egypt's collapse were many and layered. The most pressing problem was nature itself. In the final years of the Old Kingdom, the Nile's floods became weaker and less predictable. Fields that had always been green turned brown. Harvests failed, food ran short, and famine spread through the villages. Without enough to eat, families suffered. People left their homes searching for any place where the crops still grew. As hunger grew, the authority of the pharaoh began to fade. Once his word had brought order to every corner of the land. But now, with the central government weakened, governors in each region, those nomarchs started to act as independent rulers. They raised their own armies, collected their own taxes, and built their own tombs. The unity that had defined Egypt for centuries began to unravel. There was no longer one king over all Egypt. Instead, many claimed the right to rule. Some were powerful nobles. Others were priests, generals, or even upstart adventurers. Civil war broke out. Towns that had once traded peacefully now fought for control of land and water. Great cities like Thebes and Heracleopolis became rival capitals, each with its own king and its own vision of Egypt's future. The chaos reached every part of society. Temples once full of offerings were abandoned. Tombs were robbed, and ancient treasures disappeared. Law and order collapsed in many regions. The old ideal of Ma'at, truth and balance, seemed lost. Instead, people spoke of Isfet, chaos, disorder, and fear. But even in dark times, hope can survive. Some nomarchs tried to bring peace to their lands. They built local canals, stored grain, and cared for their people. Families stuck together, relying on old traditions to weather the storm. Artists and writers found new ways to express sorrow and longing. In their poetry, they spoke of the pain of loss and the dream of a world restored. The struggles of this period left deep marks on Egypt's memory. People remembered the hunger, the violence, and the years when no single king could bring order. Yet they also remembered the lessons learned, the need for wise leadership, for strong communities, and for a government that listened to its people. Slowly, a new power began to rise. In the city of Thebes in southern Egypt, a line of strong rulers gathered followers. They promised to reunite the land, restore the temples, and bring back the old ways. Through careful diplomacy, alliances, and when needed, war, the Theban kings gained strength. One by one, they defeated their rivals, until once again a single ruler sat on Egypt's throne. The first intermediate period ended around 2055 BCE, when Mentuhotep II of Thebes succeeded in reuniting Upper and Lower Egypt. He began the Middle Kingdom, a new era of hope and renewal. Out of the pain of collapse came a fresh start with hard lessons learned and a new vision for what Egypt could become. The story of this time is a reminder that no civilization is immune to disaster. Nature, leadership, and fortune can all shift in an instant, but it is also a story of survival, the determination to endure, to adapt, and to dream again of peace and plenty on the banks of the Nile. Section 7. The Middle Kingdom Restoration and Renaissance, c. 2055 to 1650 BCE. After years of division and despair, Egypt found new hope in the Middle Kingdom. This era began around 2055 BCE, when the warrior king Mentuhotep II of Thebes succeeded in reuniting the land. Under his leadership, Egypt was brought back from chaos, and a new age of stability, creativity, and growth unfolded along the Nile. Mentuhotep II became the first pharaoh of the 11th dynasty. His reign was marked by both strength and vision. He restored the central government, brought the nomarchs under royal control, and rebuilt the temples that had been neglected during years of conflict. His capital at Thebes became a center of power, and faith filled with new monuments and lively markets. The pharaohs who followed Mentuhotep continued his work. They built great projects, temples, tombs, canals that spread prosperity across the land. The Middle Kingdom is often called Egypt's classical age, a time when order, justice, and culture flourished. The kings of the 12th dynasty especially left a legacy of wisdom and achievement. Senusret I, Senusret III, and Amenemhat III are names remembered for their strong rule and lasting works. One of the most important achievements of this era was the careful management of Egypt's resources. Pharaohs ordered the digging of long canals and the construction of dikes to improve irrigation. With better water control, farms yielded more crops. The government stored surplus grain, protecting people from famine and keeping prices fair. As a result, hunger was rare, and families had enough to eat, even in hard times. The Middle Kingdom was also a time of economic expansion. Egypt reached beyond its old borders, sending armies south into Nubia to control gold mines and trade routes. Fortresses and trading posts appeared along the Nile's southern stretches, marking Egypt's growing influence. Merchants traded for luxury goods, incense from Punt cedar wood, from Lebanon, copper from Sinai, and precious stones from the east. With prosperity came cultural achievement. Writers created new forms of literature, poems, stories, and wisdom texts that explored themes of loyalty, justice, and the meaning of life. The famous story of the Tale of Sinuhe, for example, tells of an Egyptian courtier who flees into exile, faces hardship, and finally returns home finding forgiveness and peace. Such stories reflect the spirit of a society that had survived crisis and was eager to celebrate unity and compassion. Art and architecture blossomed during the Middle Kingdom. Temples became larger and more elaborate, filled with carvings and colorful paintings. Statues of pharaohs and nobles were crafted with great skill, showing faces marked by wisdom, strength, and sometimes even worry, a sign of the human side of Egypt's rulers. In burial practices, new styles of tombs and coffins appeared, and religious texts became more widely available, promising eternal life not just to kings, but to all who lived rightly. The Middle Kingdom's pharaohs worked hard to keep peace within their borders. They listened to their people, settled disputes, and tried to rule with fairness. Laws and taxes were enforced with care, but the ideal of ma'at, balance and justice, remained at the heart of government. Scribes and officials became trusted servants of the crown, helping to maintain Egypt's smooth running. Yet even in this golden age, trouble sometimes loomed. The wealth and power of local governors grew, and competition between families could still threaten unity. Egypt's borders expanded, but new enemies watched from afar. In time, foreign powers began to see the Nile Valley as a prize worth seeking. For now, though, the Middle Kingdom shone as a model of good government, artistic achievement, and social harmony. The fields of Egypt grew thick with grain. Cities buzzed with life and color. People worked, prayed, and dreamed in the shadow of temples and tombs, believing that the world would remain in balance as long as Ma'at was honored, and the pharaoh ruled with wisdom. The Middle Kingdom stands as a testament to Egypt's ability to recover, to learn from the past, and to build a society where order, beauty, and justice could flourish anew. Section 8: Foreign Threats and Internal Weakness, the Second Intermediate Period, 1650 to 1550 BCE. No civilization stands unchallenged forever. For Egypt, the closing years of the Middle Kingdom brought shadows and threats both from inside and beyond its borders. As the power of the pharaohs began to slip, the unity that had held Egypt together for centuries started to weaken. This opened the door for foreign invaders and marked the beginning of the Second Intermediate Period, around 1650 BCE. The seeds of trouble were sown gradually. The great pharaohs of the 12th dynasty had built strong walls, collected taxes, and kept the local governors in check. But as generations passed, these checks weakened. The power of the central government faded. Local rulers in the delta and along the Nile acted more and more like small kings in their own right. They built their own armies, collected their own taxes, and paid less attention to the authority of the true pharaoh in Thebes. This division made Egypt vulnerable, and soon from the northeast came a new force, an invading people known as the Hyksos. Their origins are not entirely clear, but historians believe they came from Western Asia, perhaps from the lands of Canaan or Syria. The Hyksos arrived gradually, at first as traders and settlers. They learned the Egyptian language, copied their customs, and lived among them. But as Egypt grew weak, the Hyksos grew bold. The Hyksos brought with them something new and deadly: horses and war chariots. Egyptians had never fought against such weapons before. The chariot was fast and powerful. Warriors could move quickly across the battlefield, shooting arrows or charging with spears. The Hyksos also used strong bows and new forms of armor. In time, these new tactics proved too much for Egypt's older style of warfare. Around 1650 BCE, the Hyksos seized control of Lower Egypt and made their capital at Avaris in the Nile Delta. They ruled the north for nearly 100 years. Egypt was split again, as it had been centuries before. The pharaohs in Thebes still ruled Upper Egypt, but their power was limited. They paid tribute to the Hyksos and watched their lands shrink. The Hyksos period brought both pain and learning. The new rulers taxed the people and sometimes destroyed temples, but they also introduced new technologies: bronze weapons, improved fortifications, and new crops. Egyptian artisans copied Hyksos styles, and scribes wrote in both Egyptian and foreign scripts. Egypt for the first time became a crossroads for cultures and ideas. But life under foreign rule was hard. People remembered the old days when one pharaoh ruled a united land. In Thebes, pride and anger grew. Pharaohs like Sekenenre Tao Kamose and finally Ahmose led their people in a struggle for freedom. There were long years of war, with battles fought from city to city, sometimes even inside the walls of the Hyksos' own capital. It was not only the Hyksos who challenged Egypt's unity. In the south, the kingdom of Kush grew strong and sometimes claimed land along the Nile. Bandits and mercenaries raided the countryside. Rival families fought for control of cities. The old vision of Ma'at, balance and justice, seemed far away. And yet even in these dark years, Egypt did not fall. The Theban pharaohs rebuilt their armies and learned the new ways of war. They forged alliances, trained charioteers, and gathered the people for one last desperate effort to win back their land. By 1550 BCE, the Hyksos were driven out. Ahmose, a king of Thebes, marched north and captured Avaris. He reunited Egypt and became the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, ending the Second Intermediate Period. The years of foreign rule had taught Egypt harsh lessons about weakness, about unity, and about the value of new ideas. Out of struggle and loss, the Egyptians emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to enter the greatest era of their civilization. Section 9. The New Kingdom, Empire, and Glory. 1550 to 1070 BCE. With the Hyksos driven out and the land once again united, Egypt rose from its struggles into an age of greatness. This new era, known as the New Kingdom, began around 1550 BCE. It was a time of bold ambition, dazzling monuments, and powerful kings. Egypt reached the height of its military power and wealth, casting its shadow far beyond the Nile Valley. The New Kingdom began with Ahmose I, who restored order and rebuilt the government. He sent armies south into Nubia and east into Canaan, determined to protect Egypt's borders and prevent future invasions. The pharaohs that followed continued this path. They were no longer just defenders of Egypt. They were conquerors, empire builders, and masters of diplomacy. Egypt's armies became stronger than ever before. They marched behind fast chariots and wielded bronze weapons, new bows, and shining armor. The greatest military leader of this age was Thutmose III. Sometimes called the Napoleon of Egypt, he led at least 17 campaigns into Asia, reaching as far as the Euphrates River. Egypt's empire now stretched from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. Gold, cedar, silver, and exotic animals filled the markets of Thebes and Memphis. Not all New Kingdom rulers were warriors. Hatshepsut, one of the world's earliest and most successful female pharaohs, ruled for over 20 years. She preferred building to battle. Hatshepsut ordered the construction of beautiful temples, the most famous of which is her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, carved into the cliffs along the Nile. She opened trade routes to the mysterious land of Punt, bringing back incense, myrrh, and even living trees. Akhenaten, another unique ruler, tried to change Egypt's religion. He worshipped one god, the Aten, the disk of the sun, and moved the capital to a new city called Akhenaten. For a time, temples to old gods were closed, and the royal family was shown in a new intimate style. But after Akhenaten's death, Egypt returned to its ancient ways. The boy king Tutankhamun, famous today for his treasure-filled tomb, helped restore the old gods and traditions. Ramesses II, or Ramesses the Great, reigned for over 60 years, from 1279 to 1213 BCE. He built more monuments than any other pharaoh, statues, temples, and the grand city of Ramesses in the Delta. He fought great battles, most famously at Kadesh against the Hittite Empire. Though neither side won a clear victory, the conflict ended in one of the world's first peace treaties, written on silver tablets and carved into stone. In the New Kingdom, Egypt's cities became wonders of the world. Thebes, with its vast temple of Karnak and the Valley of the Kings, was filled with priests, scribes, builders, and traders. Nobles and officials built rich tombs decorated with colorful scenes of daily life and dreams of the afterlife. Art flourished, statues, paintings, jewelry, and even furniture showed a new level of skill and beauty. Egyptian society became more complex. The power of the pharaoh grew, but so did the influence of the priests, especially those of Amun, the hidden god of Thebes. Wealth flowed into the temples. The king's advisors, generals, and scribes managed the empire, planned campaigns, and kept the wheels of government turning. The New Kingdom was also a time of contact with the outside world. Egypt traded and sometimes fought with mighty empires, the Hittites, the Mitanni, the Assyrians. Envoys carried gifts and messages, forging alliances through marriage treaties and diplomacy. Foreigners, Nubians, Syrians, Libyans came to live and work in Egypt, some rising to high positions at court. But power brings challenges. As Egypt grew richer, enemies grew jealous. In the later years of the New Kingdom, invasions from the Sea Peoples and rebellion in distant provinces began to strain the empire. The cost of constant war and grand building weighed heavily on Egypt's people. Still, for 5 centuries, the New Kingdom shone with unmatched splendor. The temples of Karnak and Luxor, the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, and the statues of Ramses all stand as proof of an age when Egypt stood at the very center of the ancient world, a beacon of power, wealth, and wonder. Section 10: Egyptian Society in the New Kingdom, Power, Faith, and Daily Life. Life in New Kingdom Egypt was vibrant, layered, and filled with change. At the very top of society, the pharaoh was still seen as a living god, a ruler chosen by the divine to maintain order, lead the armies, and guide the nation's faith. But beneath the grandeur of the throne, society was growing ever more complex. The country's newfound wealth, empire, and foreign contacts changed how Egyptians lived, worshipped, and dreamed. The royal family was at the heart of public life. Pharaohs built colossal palaces and paraded in golden chariots, followed by priests, soldiers, scribes, and musicians. Powerful queens sometimes ruled as regents, or even as pharaohs themselves, as Hatshepsut had done. Royal children were educated in the arts of rule reading, writing, war, and ceremony, so they could take their place as future leaders. Below the royal family were the nobles and top officials, many of whom were military commanders or senior priests. Some had earned their rank by bravery on the battlefield. Others were trusted advisors, tax collectors, or architects of the great building projects. Their tombs at Thebes and Saqqara were filled with art treasures and detailed scenes of family banquets, religious ceremonies, and visits from foreign envoys. These images reveal a society proud of its achievements and hungry for both earthly and eternal rewards. The priesthood rose to unprecedented influence. The temples of Amun at Karnak and Luxor became not only centers of worship, but vast economic engines. Temples owned fields, herds, granaries, and workshops. They employed thousands, priests, singers, dancers, craftsmen, scribes, and guards. High priests rivaled the pharaoh in wealth, and at times even in political power. The great festivals like the Opet festival in Thebes drew crowds of people to celebrate, pray, and hope for the favor of the gods. The scribes were the engine of administration. From offices in cities and temple complexes, they wrote letters, recorded grain stores, tallied taxes, and kept the wheels of government running. Their skills made them respected and allowed some to rise to wealth and social standing. The famous Satire of the Trades, a popular text from the period, jokes that being a scribe was much easier than being a farmer, fisherman, or soldier. Soldiers were vital to the new kingdom. As Egypt expanded its borders, a standing army became more important than ever before. Many young men served in the army, learning to ride chariots, shoot bows, and fight with spears. Foreign mercenaries joined the ranks, and some were rewarded with land or positions in society after their service. Veterans often returned home with tales of distant lands and gifts from the spoils of war. Artisans and craftsmen filled the cities and villages. They built the temples, painted the tombs, and made everything from furniture to jewelry, statues, and musical instruments. In the village of Deir el-Medina, the workers who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings lived in houses with gardens, painted their walls, and left behind records of their lives. Strikes for better pay, disputes with neighbors, and prayers to the gods. Most people in Egypt, though, were still farmers. They lived along the Nile in mud brick houses with palm leaf roofs. Each year, as in ages past, they planted wheat, barley, and flax, cared for livestock, and depended on the river's flood for their livelihood. Their lives were hard, but the annual festivals, temple visits, and simple joys, family music, and games brought meaning and comfort. Women in the New Kingdom could own property, manage businesses, and serve as priestesses or musicians. Queens and noblewomen sometimes acted as regents for young sons or as powerful voices at court. Some married foreign princes to secure alliances. Others were remembered for their wisdom, beauty, and generosity. Foreigners became a more common sight. Nubians served as soldiers, Levantines as merchants, Libyans as mercenaries, and even some Greeks arrived as traders or artisans. The population grew more diverse, especially in the bustling cities and military outposts. Religion touched every part of life. People prayed for health, luck, and safe passage to the afterlife. Amulets protected babies. Offerings to the dead filled tombs. The gods seemed close sometimes, fierce, sometimes gentle, always a part of the world's great cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Despite the empire's wealth and power, the pressures of conquest and the demands of government placed new burdens on the people. Taxes grew. Corruption sometimes crept in. The dreams of glory competed with the reality of daily toil. Still, the story of the New Kingdom is one of extraordinary achievement and creativity of a people who loved life, honored the gods, and built a society whose influence can still be seen and felt today. Section 11: Art, Science, and Literature. The height of Egyptian creativity. The New Kingdom was not just an age of military glory and royal ambition. It was also a golden age for art, science, and the written word. In these centuries, Egypt's craftsmen, scribes, doctors, and thinkers set new standards for beauty and learning that would influence the world for thousands of years. Walk through the temples of Karnak and Luxor, and you will see walls covered with vivid colors and detailed carvings. Artists told stories in stone scenes of pharaohs offering gifts to the gods of battles and victories of festivals, farming, and the changing of the seasons. In the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, paintings glow with images of the sun's journey, the weighing of the heart, and the joys of the afterlife. Each detail was chosen with care. Every symbol, every color had meaning, a language of art known to all Egyptians. Statues of the pharaohs and gods filled the land. Some were carved in stone, others cast in bronze or covered in gold leaf. The faces looked calm, wise, and eternal. Artists followed strict rules but also brought life and individuality to their work. The statue of Ramesses II at Abu Simbel stands nearly 70 feet tall, a mountain of stone that gazes out over the desert, daring time itself to erase its memory. Egyptian artisans created furniture, jewelry, perfume jars, musical instruments, and toys with skill that still amazes. Goldsmiths shaped necklaces, earrings, and rings for queens and nobles. Woodworkers made inlaid chairs and beds. Glassmakers blew delicate vases in bright colors. Music filled the palaces and streets, harps, flutes, drums, and voices rising in celebration or prayer. But the greatest treasure of all may have been the written word. Egyptian scribes developed a writing system called hieroglyphs, a blend of pictures and symbols written on temple walls and papyrus scrolls. Writing was the key to government, religion, and memory. Scribes recorded laws, lists of goods, stories, hymns, and poems. They wrote prayers for the living and the dead, spells for protection, and messages to the gods. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and prayers for the afterlife, became a guide for souls on their journey beyond death. Storytellers wrote tales of adventure, romance, and wisdom, like the story of Sinuhe, the shipwrecked sailor, and the eloquent peasant. These stories, full of longing, courage, and hope, remind us that ancient Egyptians dreamed and loved much as we do. Science and medicine flourished. Priests and doctors studied the body, the stars, and the rhythms of the world. They wrote medical papyri describing illnesses, treatments, and surgeries. Egyptian doctors could set broken bones, stitch wounds, and use herbs and minerals as medicine. Midwives and healers brought new life safely into the world. Astronomy was used to track the flooding of the Nile, mark the calendar, and set dates for festivals and rituals. The Egyptians divided the year into 12 months of 30 days, with 5 extra days at the end for holy celebrations. Mathematics and engineering were practical arts. Builders designed pyramids, temples, and obelisks, using precise measurements and simple but clever tools. Surveyors measured fields for taxes after the floods. Workers calculated the number of bricks, the angle of ramps, the weight of stones, and the flow of water in irrigation canals. Every major achievement, every monument, every festival, every journey was made possible by Egyptian know-how. The creativity of the new kingdom reached far beyond its borders. Foreign princes sent gifts. Artists and scribes from other lands came to learn. Even centuries later, the Greeks and Romans marveled at Egypt's wisdom and beauty. To this day, the treasures found in tombs and temples, paintings, statues, jewelry, and scrolls bring the world of ancient Egypt back to life. In this age of achievement, Egyptians believed that to create was to honor the gods and secure a place in eternity. Their art, science, and stories are still here waiting for us to remember, to wonder, and to dream. Section 12. Foreign Relations, War, Trade, and Diplomacy. In the New Kingdom, Egypt's borders were no longer the quiet banks of the Nile. They stretched far to the south and north to the lands of Nubia, the Levant, and even beyond. The wealth and power of Egypt drew both friends and rivals. This era was marked by war, by alliances and betrayals, by bustling trade, and by the art of diplomacy. Pharaohs knew that security did not end at the edge of their fields. They needed to control vital trade routes, mines, and distant outposts. Armies marched south into Nubia seeking gold, cattle, and slaves. Egypt built a chain of forts and temples along the Nile's southern reach from Elephantine down to the Fourth Cataract. Nubian rulers were brought to court, some educated as Egyptian nobles, while others led rebellions that were harshly crushed. In time, Nubia became both a province and a partner, its culture mixing with that of Egypt. To the north and east, in the lands of Canaan and Syria, Egypt faced new challenges. Here, powerful city-states flourished, ruled by local kings, and sometimes supported by great empires like the Mitanni, and later the Hittites. Egyptian pharaohs sent armies to enforce their rule, claiming tribute and demanding loyalty. The battles were fierce. The most famous was the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BCE, when Ramesses II faced the Hittite king Muwatalli II. Though the battle ended in a stalemate, it showed the power and reach of both kingdoms. After years of fighting, the rulers of Egypt and the Hittites made peace. They signed a treaty sealed by royal marriages and the exchange of gifts. This was one of the earliest known international peace treaties in history, a sign that negotiation could sometimes do what war could not. Trade flourished along the same roads and rivers that saw so many armies. Egyptian merchants traded for timber from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus, silver from Anatolia, and horses and chariots from Asia. Ivory, incense, and precious stones arrived from Africa. Egyptian gold, grain, linen, and papyrus were sent in return. Markets in Thebes and Memphis filled with exotic goods, colorful glass, fine oils, rare woods, and animals from distant lands. Diplomacy was an art. Pharaohs sent letters, gifts, and ambassadors to the great courts of the ancient world. The Amarna letters, a famous set of clay tablets found at Akhenaten, show how Egyptian rulers communicated with kings and queens from Babylon, Assyria, the Hittites, and beyond. These messages were full of formal greetings, requests for marriage alliances, pleas for aid, and sometimes sharp warnings. Foreigners came to Egypt as traders, craftsmen, soldiers, and even royal brides. Some rose to high office, bringing new ideas and customs. Egyptian culture, too, spread outward. Priests and architects traveled to foreign lands, and Egyptian art, language, and religion left their mark on neighboring peoples. But the flow of goods and ideas also brought dangers. Ambition and greed tempted both Egyptians and their rivals. Sometimes the treasures brought home by traders and soldiers caused jealousy, corruption, and unrest. The cost of empire, endless war tribute, and the need to garrison distant lands began to strain Egypt's resources. Even so, the years of the New Kingdom were a time when Egypt stood at the crossroads of the ancient world. Its influence was felt from the deserts of Libya to the mountains of Anatolia, from the heart of Africa to the shores of the Mediterranean. The story of Egypt's foreign relations is one of movement and exchange, of war and peace gifts, and demands hope and disappointment. It is the story of a nation that opened itself to the wider world, and in doing so became both stronger and more vulnerable. Section 13: Seeds of Decline, Internal Strife, and External Pressure. Even the greatest empires are not immune to weakness. As Egypt's power reached its height, the first shadows of decline crept across the land. In the late years of the New Kingdom, after centuries of growth, the seeds of trouble began to take root. They grew slowly at first, almost unnoticed, but over time they would shake Egypt to its very core. One of the biggest changes was the growing power of the temples, especially those dedicated to the god Amun in Thebes. The priests of Amun became enormously wealthy. They owned vast tracts of land, collected taxes, and commanded large numbers of workers. Some high priests became almost as powerful as the pharaoh himself. As the balance of power shifted, conflicts sometimes erupted between the throne and the temple. At times, Egypt seemed to have two rulers, one in the palace, one in the temple. Corruption also began to spread through the government. Officials sometimes took more than their share of taxes or favored their own families and friends. The weight of tribute from foreign lands, the expense of constant warfare, and the cost of endless building projects all drained Egypt's treasury. To meet expenses, taxes increased, falling hardest on the farmers and laborers who worked the land. As the government weakened, the provinces became restless. Local governors, generals, and noble families sometimes acted independently, ignoring the pharaoh's commands. In distant towns and borderlands, loyalty to the throne faded. The clear order that had defined Egypt for centuries began to blur. Outside Egypt's borders, new enemies gathered. The Hittite Empire fell, replaced by fierce newcomers, the so-called Sea Peoples, who arrived by ship and attacked the delta with sudden violence around 1200 BCE. At the same time, Libyan tribes pushed in from the west, and Nubian kingdoms grew stronger in the south. In the east, the growing power of Assyria threatened the lands Egypt had once ruled. The pharaohs tried to hold back the tide. Ramesses III fought off invasions by the Sea Peoples and Libyans, but each victory cost more than the last. The army grew weaker as fewer men could be trained and equipped. Trade declined, famine and plague sometimes struck, and the great temples could not always be filled with offerings. Social tensions grew sharper. Workers in the village of Deir el-Medina, who built the royal tombs, went on strike, one of the first recorded labor protests in history. Their wages, paid in grain, were delayed. The workers marched to the temple and refused to return to their tasks until they were heard. Their courage was a sign of the frustrations felt by many in the land. In homes along the Nile, ordinary people felt the strain. They still celebrated the old festivals, prayed for good floods, and trusted in the wisdom of the gods. But there was worry in the air, a sense that the world was changing, that old certainties no longer held. Through all these challenges, Egypt endured, but its unity was fragile. When a great pharaoh died, succession was often contested. Rival claimants, ambitious generals, or powerful priests vied for the throne. Civil wars flared only to settle for a time before erupting again. The golden age of Egypt was not ended by one disaster or a single defeat. It faded gradually as many small troubles combined into a long period of crisis. Egypt's people, once united by faith in the pharaoh and pride in their land, found themselves facing new uncertainties, both from within and without. These seeds of decline would eventually bear bitter fruit, leading to an age of foreign rule and the end of Egypt's independence as a mighty empire. But for now, Egypt still stood proud, wounded, and waiting for the next chapter in its long story. Section 14, The Late Period, Foreign Rule and Struggle for Independence, c. 664–332 BCE. As the new kingdom faded and the centuries passed, Egypt faced a new world, one shaped by invasion, division, and the struggle for survival. This era, known as the Late Period, began around 664 BCE and lasted until the coming of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE. It was an age of foreign rule, lost glory, and stubborn hope. The story begins with Egypt's decline into chaos. Rival dynasties, weak rulers, and ambitious priests tore the land apart. In this confusion, foreign powers saw opportunity. The Nubians from the south, known as the 25th dynasty, rose up and for a time ruled all of Egypt. Their kings, the Black Pharaohs, restored temples, honored the gods, and dreamed of a new golden age. But their rule was challenged by the growing power of Assyria, a mighty empire from Mesopotamia. In 671 BCE, the Assyrians swept into Egypt with iron weapons and fierce armies. They captured Memphis, sacked Thebes, and sent the Nubian pharaohs fleeing back to Kush. For decades, Egypt was battered by foreign invaders. Its cities plundered, its people left uncertain about the future. Yet Egypt did not give up. In the north, a family of princes from the city of Sais, led by Psamtik I, rose to power. They fought back the Assyrians and began the 26th dynasty, a time of brief revival. Psamtik and his successors rebuilt the army, hired Greek mercenaries, and encouraged trade with the wider Mediterranean world. Greek merchants came to live in cities like Naucratis, bringing new ideas and customs. Despite these efforts, Egypt's independence remained fragile. To the east, the Persians rose as a superpower. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II invaded and conquered Egypt, adding it to the vast Achaemenid Empire. For nearly 2 centuries, with short interruptions, Egypt was ruled by foreign kings. The Persians allowed the pharaohs to remain in name, but true power rested in the hands of satraps, royal governors sent from Persia. Life under Persian rule was a mix of old and new. Temples still rang with prayers to Isis and Osiris. Egyptian law and custom remained strong, especially in the countryside. But taxes were high, and many Egyptians felt like strangers in their own land. Rebellion simmered just beneath the surface. At times, local rulers seized the moment and declared independence, but these revivals were often short-lived. In the late 4th century BCE, Egypt became a chess piece in the power struggles of the ancient world. Persian kings lost their hold as new challengers rose in the west. In 332 BCE, the young and brilliant Alexander the Great marched into Egypt without a battle. He was welcomed as a liberator, crowned as a pharaoh at Memphis, and declared the son of Amun by the priests of the great temple at Siwa Oasis. With Alexander's arrival, the long era of native Egyptian rule ended. Egypt would become the jewel of the Greek world, ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty for 3 more centuries. But even under foreign masters, the spirit of Egypt, its temples, gods, and memories endured. The dream of independence was never lost. The late period is a tale of loss, but also of resilience. Time and again, Egypt's people endured invasion, oppression, and hardship. They fought, adapted, and found ways to survive. The Nile still flooded the sun, still rose, and the pyramids still stood as silent witnesses to the courage of a nation that refused to fade away. Section 15. The coming of Alexander, the end of an era, 332 BCE. A new dawn arrived in 332 BCE. It came not from within the Nile Valley, but from distant lands far to the northwest. Alexander the Great, a young Macedonian king, marched into Egypt with his armies. The world was changing fast. For the first time in over 3,000 years, Egypt's fate would be shaped by men and ideas from outside its ancient borders. Alexander's arrival was peaceful. Egypt, weary from years of Persian rule, opened its gates to him. The people saw in him not just another conqueror, but a liberator, a ruler who respected their customs and honored their gods. When Alexander entered Memphis, crowds greeted him with cheers and ceremonies. The priests crowned him as pharaoh, draping him in royal robes and giving him the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. But Alexander was more than a traditional king. He saw Egypt as the perfect place to link his new empire, a bridge between East and West, between the old world and the new. He traveled across the land, studying its wonders, visiting its temples, and learning its stories. At Siwa Oasis, far in the western desert, he sought the oracle of Amun, where priests declared him to be the son of the god himself. This moment was important both for the Greeks and for the Egyptians. It bound Alexander's destiny to the ancient myths of the Nile. Alexander's greatest mark on Egypt was the founding of a new city, Alexandria, on the Mediterranean coast. He chose its site carefully at the edge of the Nile Delta, where trade winds met the sea. Alexandria would become a symbol of a new era, a city of marble and columns, where Greek and Egyptian cultures mixed, where merchants and scholars gathered, and where the famous lighthouse and library would one day stand. Alexander did not stay long. His eyes were always set on distant lands, Babylon, Persia, India. But he left Egypt forever changed. The old line of native pharaohs was gone. In its place, the Ptolemaic dynasty descendants of Alexander's general Ptolemy would rule Egypt for nearly 300 years. They brought with them the customs of Greece, mixing them with the traditions of the Nile. God's language and art blended. Old temples were restored, new ones were built, and the cult of the pharaoh endured, now seen through a Greek lens. Yet even as the world changed, the heart of Egypt remained. The Nile still flowed, the pyramids still stood, and the farmers still planted and harvested as their ancestors had done for generations. In the shadows of Alexandria's new palaces, priests still whispered prayers to Osiris and Isis, hoping that the balance of Ma'at would one day be restored. The coming of Alexander marks the true end of Egypt's independence as an ancient civilization. It closed a chapter that had begun before history itself. And yet it was not the end of Egypt's story. The land of the pharaohs would continue to inspire awe, curiosity, and wonder now, as part of a world much larger than even the greatest king could have imagined. Section 16. Egypt's enduring legacy, memory, and influence. Even after the last native pharaoh was gone, Egypt's story did not end. Its legacy flowed out across the world, carried by travelers, conquerors, scholars, and dreamers. Ancient Egypt became a land of memory and wonder, a source of inspiration for kings and poets, artists and architects, scientists and seekers. The Greeks and Romans who ruled Egypt after Alexander stood in awe of the temples, pyramids, and monuments they found along the Nile. Greek scholars studied hieroglyphs, copied Egyptian medicines, and wrote books about the wisdom of the priests. The Romans, too, admired Egypt's achievements. They rebuilt cities, restored temples, and placed their own emperors in the ancient tradition of the pharaohs. Alexandria became one of the great cities of the Mediterranean world. Its lighthouse, the Pharaohs, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria gathered thousands of scrolls, drawing scholars from far and wide. Here, ideas from Egypt, Greece, Persia, India, and beyond met and mixed, giving rise to new discoveries in science, mathematics, and philosophy. The city became a bridge between East and West, old and new. Egypt's religion, art, and stories reached far beyond its borders. The image of the Sphinx, the beauty of lotus columns, the mystery of hidden tombs. These entered the imagination of people everywhere. Tales of the afterlife, of gods who died and rose again, of the quest for immortality, shaped the myths and beliefs of later cultures. Even in the Bible, Egypt appears as a land of power and mystery, a place of both danger and refuge. As centuries passed, much was forgotten. The secrets of hieroglyphs were lost, buried in the sand. Temples crumbled, statues fell, and the sands of the Sahara covered old roads and cities. But Egypt's allure remained. In the Middle Ages, travelers and storytellers brought back tales of the great ruins. Artists in Europe dreamed of Egypt's golden age, filling paintings and stories with images of pyramids and pharaohs. In the 19th century, Egypt's mysteries began to open once more. Napoleon's scholars mapped the land and drew its monuments. In 1799, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, a slab of rock with the same message written in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, gave scholars the key to unlocking the ancient language. Soon, Egyptology was born. Archaeologists like Champollion, Petrie Carter, and many others dug deep into the sand, uncovering tombs, treasures, and secrets that had slept for thousands of years. The wonders they found amazed the world. The golden mask of Tutankhamun, the grand halls of Karnak and Luxor, the painted walls of the Valley of the Kings, museums filled with artifacts, statues, papyri tools, jewelry that spoke of a people both distant and close, mysterious, yet human. Today, Egypt's legacy is everywhere. In architecture and design, in medicine and math, in stories and dreams. Children learn of pyramids and mummies. Tourists walk where pharaohs once walked, stand in the shadow of great stones, and feel the quiet of the ancient desert. Egypt reminds us of the power of memory, the wonder of creation, and the deep ties that bind us to the past. The journey of ancient Egypt is not just a tale of kings and wars. It is the story of how a civilization built on the banks of a life-giving river changed the world and continues to call out to us, inviting us to remember to seek and to imagine. Section 17, Conclusion. Lessons from the Rise and Fall. The story of ancient Egypt is more than a tale of pyramids, pharaohs, and lost treasures. It is a journey through the human heart, a lesson about the rise of great dreams, the building of lasting wonders, and the challenges that come with power and ambition. As we look back across more than 3,000 years, the lessons of Egypt speak quietly yet clearly to every generation. Egypt began with the Nile, with people learning to read the rhythms of the river and build their lives from its gifts. It reminds us that all greatness is rooted in the land, in the steady work of countless hands, and in respect for the forces of nature. When people understood the world around them, they could create stability, prosperity, and hope. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under one king taught the value of unity and vision. From small villages grew a mighty nation made strong not by chance, but by wise leadership and the ability to bring people together. In Egypt, we see the strength that comes from shared purpose, a lesson for any community or country that dreams of greatness. The Old Kingdom's pyramids and temples remind us of what people can achieve when they believe in something larger than themselves. The building of stone monuments was more than a display of wealth or power. It was an act of faith, a message to future generations that what we build to last. The collapse of the Old Kingdom and the chaos that followed are lessons in humility. Even the greatest systems can falter if leaders forget the needs of their people, if nature changes, or if pride outpaces wisdom. Survival depended on learning, adapting, and finding hope in the darkest of times. Egypt's golden ages in the Middle and New Kingdoms teach us that societies thrive when they combine order with creativity, faith with curiosity, and tradition with openness to new ideas. The expansion of trade, art, and science made Egypt strong, just as isolation and fear brought weakness. Their achievements in medicine, writing, architecture, and diplomacy still echo across the world. The seeds of decline remind us that every empire, no matter how powerful, can face threats from within and without. Corruption, inequality, war, and division slowly undermined the foundations built over centuries. When leaders lost touch with their people or placed themselves above the common good, the result was crisis. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson of all is endurance. Egypt was conquered, divided, and ruled by foreign kings, but its spirit survived. The memory of Egypt, the symbols, the language, the faith in rebirth remained alive, carried forward by its people, and admired by the world. Today, as we watch the sun rise over the Nile or trace the lines of a hieroglyph, we are reminded that nothing built with heart and vision is truly lost. Egypt's rise and fall are a mirror for all of us, a call to remember to learn and to strive for balance between past and future, power and compassion, ambition and wisdom. The story of ancient Egypt lives on not only in stone and sand, but in every dream of greatness, every effort to build, and every hope that across time what we create will last.